It was meant to be the perfect day, the culmination of months of planning, excitement, and dreams. Mira Turner stood in her white wedding gown. Her groom, Derek Langford, stood at the altar, beaming with anticipation. But moments before the ceremony was set to begin, everything changed. As Mira stepped forward, ready to take her vows, Derek motioned for her to stop. With a nervous glance, he leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. Something that's been buried for years. It's too big to keep hidden any longer." Mira's heart skipped a beat as the words hit her. Before she could process, Derek's confession would shake her to her core. In that instant, the perfect wedding turned into something unthinkable. What was supposed to be a union of love would soon be overshadowed by a long-buried secret, a truth so damning that it could destroy everything they had worked for. Just as the room fell silent, a noise outside pierced the air, the screech of police sirens. Mira's world tilted as the truth slowly began to unravel. And the worst part? It was too late for anyone to stop it. The small town of Kingsbridge had always been a place where life moved at a steady, predictable pace. It was a town known for its family-friendly atmosphere, quiet streets, and a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other. Nestled along the coast, it was a place people went to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. Peaceful, serene, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Mira Turner, 28, had grown up in Kingsbridge. She was a local schoolteacher, well-liked by her students and respected by her colleagues. Known for her kind nature and warm smile, Mira had always been the picture of stability in the town. At least, that's how everyone saw her. To them, she was just the girl next door, a modest woman with big dreams of family, love, and a perfect life. Derek Langford, 32, was a newcomer to Kingsbridge. A successful software developer, he had moved to the town to escape the high-stress lifestyle of city living. His charm and easygoing demeanor quickly won over the community, and within a year he and Mira became a couple. Their relationship was seen as the epitome of love, perfect on the surface, with no hint of trouble beneath. But what no one knew was that Derek, despite his outward appearance, was hiding a dark secret. A secret that, once revealed, would shatter everything. The moment Derek Langford stepped away from Mira at the altar, the air in the church grew thick with tension. For a brief second, Mira looked at him, hoping for a joke, perhaps a bit of nervous humor before the vows. But Derek's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured for her to remain calm. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging glances, others looking down at their shoes, unaware of the dark confession that was unfolding before them. "I'm not who you think I am," Derek said, his voice low but urgent. "I need to tell you something. Something about my past. Something that will change everything." Mira's stomach dropped. The excitement she had felt just moments before was replaced by a cold sense of dread. She could hear the distant murmur of guests, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. But all Mira could focus on was Derek, his words hanging heavy in the air. "I've been hiding this from you for years," he continued. "But the truth is, I don't think I can keep it a secret any longer." Before Mira could respond, the door at the back of the church suddenly swung open. The sound of sirens, police cars pulling up outside, ripped through the building. The guests, still confused, started to murmur again, some nervously glancing around. Mira looked back at Derek, his face now a shade of white she had never seen before. Is it about the wedding?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek remained silent, his face frozen in place, eyes avoiding hers. His mouth opened as if he were about to speak, but before he could say another word, the police entered, their presence commanding immediate attention. The officer who approached the altar was serious and focused. Without hesitation, he turned to the congregation, announcing that they needed to speak with Derek Langford immediately. The police presence alone made it clear that whatever secret Derek had been hiding was far darker than Mira could have imagined. And it wasn't just a private matter anymore, it was now a full-blown investigation. As the officer moved closer, Derek's eyes widened, his body stiffening as if bracing himself for what was coming next. Mira stood motionless, her hand still, holding the bouquet of flowers, her mind racing. Before anyone could fully understand the situation, the police escorted Derek outside, leaving Mira standing in the middle of the aisle. The guests remained seated, a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. The day that had been meant to celebrate love was quickly spiraling into a nightmare. Mira's mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. What had Derek done? What could possibly have led to this? Minutes later, Mira was escorted outside to the waiting police cars. She still hadn't fully processed what had happened, but her body moved on its own accord. She stepped outside into the bright sunlight, squinting against the sudden contrast, to the dim church. A police officer handed her a document, an official arrest warrant for Derek Langford, charged with the murder of his former business partner, Thomas Caldwell. The words didn't immediately make sense. Thomas Caldwell was a name Mira didn't recognize, but the officer's next statement was enough to freeze her where she stood. Derek Langford is suspected of being involved in the death of Thomas Caldwell, and the murder has been linked to a series of financial transactions that go back several years. Mira's world began to spin. This was the man she had planned to marry, the man she had trusted above all others. Now, with just a few words, everything had changed. The quiet, charming man who had wooed her, who had promised her a life full of happiness, was now the center of a criminal investigation. The man she loved had been hiding a secret, and that secret was darker than anyone could have imagined. As the days following the wedding debacle turned into a whirlwind of investigation, the town of Kingsbridge, once tranquil and untouched by scandal, was thrown into chaos. News of Derek Langford's arrest spread like wildfire. The community, who had seen him as a charming newcomer, was now left grappling with the shocking revelation that he was linked to a murder, one that had gone unnoticed until it came to light. Through a confession at the altar, Detective Sienna Drake, a seasoned investigator known for her methodical approach, was assigned to lead the investigation into the murder of Thomas Caldwell. As the news continued to break, Sienna quickly realized that this case would be more complex than any she had previously encountered. The first step in the investigation was to piece together Derek Langford's past. It was clear that the charming, successful software developer wasn't the man he appeared to be. Detective Drake began by examining his personal records, focusing on his professional background and his relationship with Thomas Caldwell. The investigation revealed that Derek had worked closely with Caldwell years prior in a tech startup that had failed disastrously. The business venture had collapsed under mysterious circumstances, and Thomas Caldwell had taken the fall for it. Financial discrepancies had been swept under the rug, and Caldwell's reputation had been destroyed. For years, Derek had publicly claimed that he had moved on from the failed business, but Sienna discovered that Derek's involvement was far deeper than he had ever admitted. As Detective Drake dug further into the past, she discovered an unsettling series of emails between Derek and Thomas Caldwell. The emails, dating back to the period just before Caldwell's death, contained threats and escalating tension. Derek had promised to repay Caldwell for his sacrifices, but there were no further records of repayment or resolution. The final email, sent 2 days before Caldwell's death, was chilling. It read, "You will regret this. I'll make sure of it." Detective Drake also uncovered a series of financial transactions between Derek and an anonymous offshore account, linked directly to Caldwell's former company. The accounts were untraceable, hidden under layers of fake identities and shell companies. It became clear that Derek had been involved in a much larger scheme, and the murder of Thomas Caldwell was likely the result of a betrayal within that scheme. But what caught Sienna's attention the most was the timing of Caldwell's death. The murder occurred just days before the wedding. At first glance, it seemed like an unrelated incident, another crime in a small town. But as Detective Drake connected the dots, she realized that Derek's desperate confession at the altar was not just a misplaced act of guilt. He had been trying to hide something far more sinister, something that involved far more than a simple personal issue or business rivalry. The break in the case came when the forensic team conducted an autopsy on Caldwell's body. The cause of death was initially ruled as a gunshot wound, but the investigators soon discovered something more. Traces of a rare toxin had been found in Caldwell's system, a toxin that could have been introduced weeks before his death. Further, tests revealed that the toxin had been mixed with a specific sedative, a combination that would have kept Caldwell in a vulnerable, paralyzed state before the fatal gunshot was fired. This revelation added a new layer to the investigation. It wasn't just about a failed business deal or a personal vendetta. This was a carefully planned murder. Caldwell had been incapacitated and left in a state where he couldn't defend himself, making him an easy target. The investigation then shifted its focus to the events leading up to Caldwell's murder. Detectives found a receipt for the purchase of the toxin in Derek's name, a purchase that had been made just a week before the murder. The toxin was legally obtained, but the circumstances surrounding its use raised serious questions. With this new evidence, Sienna was able to establish that Derek had meticulously planned Caldwell's murder, lacing his drink with the toxin and leaving him to suffer. The gunshot was only the final step in a much longer and more deliberate process of revenge. As the investigation continued, Detective Drake uncovered additional details that seemed to corroborate Derek's mounting guilt. Witnesses from Derek's past, including former colleagues and acquaintances, began to come forward, recounting how he had acted strangely after Caldwell's death. He had become paranoid, making odd statements and giving away personal items, all while maintaining the image of an innocent man. But even as the evidence mounted, Sienna remained cautious. She knew that Derek was not just an ordinary suspect. There were still gaps in the story, and one key question remained. Why did Derek finally confess at the altar? Was it guilt, or was there something more sinister at play? Sienna's next step was to analyze Derek's behavior in the hours following his confession. Surveillance footage from the wedding venue, along with interviews from the guests, revealed something disturbing. Derek had been calm, almost too calm despite his shocking admission. It wasn't until the police arrived that he finally showed signs of distress, as if he had been expecting the investigation to come sooner rather than later. This unsettling behavior pointed to one possibility. Derek had been preparing for his confession long before the wedding. The entire event, from the moment he stepped onto the altar to the arrival of the police, had been part of a larger plan. A plan that would finally lead to his inevitable exposure. Detective Drake's work was far from over, but the puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. Derek's confession had been a desperate attempt to buy time, but it was also the final admission of his guilt. The motive was now clear. Caldwell had to die to cover up a series of criminal acts, and Derek had been willing to sacrifice everything, including his own future, to keep his secrets buried. As the investigation continued to unfold, the case seemed to be heading toward a predictable conclusion. Derek Langford was the prime suspect, and the evidence mounting against him appeared irrefutable. The toxic substance, the gunshot, the financial transactions, it all pointed directly to him. But just as Detective Sienna Drake prepared to move forward with her case, a shocking revelation would turn everything upside down. The breakthrough came when the forensic team revisited the crime scene, seeking to confirm any details they had missed in the initial investigation. One detail stood out: an inconspicuous bottle of pills found near Thomas Caldwell's body. At first glance, it appeared irrelevant, a mere part of the clutter in the room. But after further examination, it became clear that the bottle contained a powerful sedative, one that had not been identified in the earlier autopsy reports. This discovery opened up an entirely new line of inquiry. The sedative was a rare compound, prescribed only in specific circumstances. The pills were traced back to a pharmacy located in the town where Derek had lived before moving to Kingsbridge. As Detective Drake dug deeper into the pharmacy's records, she discovered that the prescription had been filled under a different name, Mira Turner, Derek's fiancée. The connection between the prescription and Mira was immediate and damning. The pharmacist confirmed that Mira had been to the store multiple times in the weeks leading up to the wedding, requesting refills for the sedative. The pills, which were supposed to be used for minor anxiety attacks, were now linked to Caldwell's death. At first, it seemed like an innocent mistake. Perhaps Mira had been unknowingly involved in some way, but the truth was far more unsettling. A review of Mira's phone records revealed that she had made several calls to Thomas Caldwell in the weeks leading up to his death. The calls, at first thought to be innocent, were now becoming part of a much darker picture. As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, Sienna Drake's investigation shifted focus. It wasn't Derek Langford who had been acting alone, as initially suspected. Mira Turner, the woman at the center of this case, had a far deeper role than anyone had imagined. The sedative prescription, combined with the phone calls and her connection to the murder weapon, pointed to a surprising and disturbing truth. Mira had played a critical role in Caldwell's death. But why? What could possibly have driven Mira, the woman who seemed to have everything to murder her former business partner? The shocking revelation came when Detective Drake reviewed Mira's personal journals. In one entry, Mira detailed her growing animosity toward Thomas Caldwell. Though outwardly she had maintained a cordial relationship with him, her journal revealed a seething resentment that had built up over the years. Caldwell had been a significant figure in the early days of the startup Derek had been a part of, and it seemed that Mira had harbored a deep anger toward him for what she perceived as his betrayal of Derek. But it wasn't just resentment. There was a far darker motive behind Mira's actions. As Detective Drake continued to analyze the journals, she uncovered a shocking admission. Mira had been aware of the financial discrepancies surrounding the startup. Derek, desperate to keep his secrets hidden, had manipulated Mira into believing that Caldwell's death was the only way to protect their future together. She had been convinced that eliminating Caldwell would secure their wealth and allow her and Derek to live the life they had always dreamed of. The final twist came when further forensic analysis on the sedative pills revealed that Mira had tampered with the medication, ensuring that it was potent enough to render Caldwell unconscious before the fatal shot was fired. Mira had, in fact, played a critical role in orchestrating the entire murder, using her access to the sedative and her relationship with Derek to cover up his involvement. The police now faced a startling new question. Had Derek Langford been the mastermind behind the crime, or had Mira been the true orchestrator with Derek simply a pawn in her plan? With the shocking truth finally coming to light, the investigation moved quickly toward its conclusion. Detective Drake now had to piece together the full story, how Mira's calculated actions had led to the death of Thomas Caldwell, and how Derek had been manipulated into believing that he was the one protecting Mira all along. With the case against Mira Turner and Derek Langford now clear, the legal proceedings began. The shocking revelations surrounding the murder of Thomas Caldwell had sent waves through Kingsbridge. What had once seemed like a straightforward case of business rivalry had transformed into a complex web of manipulation, lies, and murder, involving both the bride and the groom. The trial started with the prosecution laying out the damning evidence. Detective Sienna Drake presented the crucial findings: the sedative prescription filled under Mira's name, her phone records linking her to Caldwell, and the damning journal entries that revealed her growing resentment toward him. But it was the forensic evidence that sealed the case. The toxicology report confirmed that the sedative, which Mira had secretly tampered with, had incapacitated Caldwell before the gunshot was fired. The prosecution also revealed Mira's role in orchestrating the murder, convincing Derek that eliminating Caldwell was the only way to secure their future. The jury was shocked as the details came to light, particularly the realization that Mira, A woman who appeared so ordinary and kind on the surface had masterminded the entire crime. Derek's defense, however, was far from what anyone expected. His attorneys tried to paint him as a victim of manipulation, claiming that Mira had played on his emotions and forced him into the murder. They argued that Derek was not the mastermind, but rather a man caught up in a web of lies spun by Mira. The defense painted Derek as an innocent man who had been unable to see the full extent of Mira's machinations. The prosecution countered this argument by showing the phone records, emails, and the financial records that indicated Derek had known more than he had let on. They argued that while Mira may have played a role in the plan, Derek was equally complicit in the murder. The case was clear. They had both acted together, and both were responsible for Caldwell's death. The courtroom was filled with tension as both sides presented their final arguments. The defense suggested that Mira was the sole instigator of the crime and that Derek had been under her control. They painted Derek as a victim of his fiancée's manipulation, but the prosecution was quick to point out that Derek had been an active participant in the crime, aware of the consequences and fully involved in the execution of the plan. As the jury deliberated, the town of Kingsbridge waited in anticipation. The case had captured the public's attention, and many were eager to see justice served. The image of the perfect couple, once admired by the community, had now been shattered, replaced by the shocking truth of their involvement in Caldwell's murder. After hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Mira Turner was found guilty of first-degree murder, with the jury concluding that she had played a central role in planning and executing the murder. Her sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Derek Langford, however, was found guilty of second-degree murder, with the jury determining that while he was complicit, his role was less direct than Mira's. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The sentencing was met with mixed reactions from the community. Many were stunned by the idea that someone so close to them, someone they had known as a model citizen, could be capable of such a crime. Others were disturbed by the realization that their neighbor, Derek Langford, had been an active participant in such a horrific act. The impact on Mira's family was especially profound. Mira's mother, once proud of her daughter's achievements, could barely bring herself to speak about the trial. The betrayal was too much to bear. For Derek's family, the pain was also deep. They had watched as he spiraled from the charming, successful man they knew into someone implicated in a murder scheme. The case left a mark on Kingsbridge that would never be erased. The quiet town, once defined by its safety and community, was forever changed. The story of Mira and Derek's betrayal served as a stark reminder that sometimes even the most perfect lives can hide the darkest secrets. The case of Mira Turner and Derek Langford remains one of the most shocking in Kingsbridge's history. What was meant to be a celebration of love and commitment turned into a tragedy that left the town stunned and divided. The once perfect couple, whose lives seemed so full of promise, were now behind bars for a crime that would haunt the community forever. As the legal proceedings came to an end, Mira was sentenced to life in prison, while Derek faced a lengthy sentence for his role in the murder. The damage done to their families, their reputations, and the entire town was immeasurable. Friends and neighbors who had once trusted them were left questioning how well they truly knew the people closest to them. The wedding that was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter instead marked the end of two lives, one ruined by ambition and manipulation, the other by betrayal and guilt. For the people of Kingsbridge, the story of Mira and Derek served as a painful lesson in the dangers of secrets and lies. It was a reminder that no matter how perfect a life may seem, on the outside there are always shadows lurking beneath the surface. The truth, once uncovered, has the power to shatter everything. As you reflect on the events that transpired, one question remains: how much can we really trust those we love? And what happens when trust is broken in the most unforgivable way? This case serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets are the ones we hide most carefully, and the truth, when it comes, is often far more destructive than we can imagine.